Children and Young People Select Committee. As normal, I'd just like to start off with introductions in case people are watching our live streaming. My name is Martin Grocott. I'm the member for the Lansdowne ward in Abergavenny and I chair this committee.
County Councillor Laura Jones for Wisham and Deputy Chair of this committee.
Hazel Eilert, Scrutiny.
Wendy Barnard, Democratic Services.
Will McLean, Chief Officer, Children and Young People.
Nikki Wellington, Finance Manager for Children and Young People.
Roger Hoggins, Head of Operations.
Pauline Batty, Catering Manager.
Mike Fowler, Parent Governor Representative.
County Councillor Maureen Powell, Councillor for Castle and in Abergavenny, member of this.
Councillor Louise Brown, Shire Newton, ward member of this committee.
Hello, Penny Jones, Cabinet Member for Social Services, Safeguarding and Health.
County Councillor Sheila Woodhouse, Member for Growfield Ward in Abergavenny, member of this committee.
Tudor Thomas, County Councillor for Priory Ward in Abergavenny and member of this committee.
Councillor Val Smith, observing.
Thank you very much, and a special thank you to our Cabinet member. Thank you very much for your attendance this morning. We do appreciate it, and I know you can't stay for probably the whole meeting, but we would value any input that you feel you might like to make to our first debate. So thank you very much for coming along this morning. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Just from Annette Daly this morning, Dr. Annette Daly.
And I had an email earlier this morning from Councillor Jo Watkins to say that she will be a little bit late, but she will be here as soon as possible. Do we have any declarations of interest at this point? And I don't think we have any members of the public who wish to make an input. So point 4 on the agenda then is confirmation of the minutes of the meeting which was held on the 20th of March. You've had these minutes for a week. I am assuming you have all read them. And firstly, are they accurate? Would somebody like to propose that we accept them? Councillor Thomas, seconded. Councillor Lane catches my eye. Are there any matters arising? Right, fine. I'll sign those minutes at the end of the meeting then. Item 5 is an interesting issue for us to consider. Certainly it is an issue that has hit the Abergavenny Chronicle this morning and I believe the South Wales Argus as well. It's an issue around managing school meal debt. And just to clarify, this is not an issue of free school meals. It is an issue of where children are taking a school meal, but their parents are not paying. Who is going to kick off and introduce this item for us? Mr. Hoggins, thank you very much. Sorry, Mr. Hoggins, can I just interrupt, ask you to put your mic on?
Didn't press it hard enough. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. There we go. Next time. So it's the service now can be paid for using on the web, using a system called Parent Pay. At the moment it relates to school meals. In the future it may well relate to Breakfast Club and to other chargeable services which a school may be provided either through the LEA or through the school. But this is now the method by which parents, guardians pay for services. it is quite possible that a debt may arise on a service. And what we are looking for is your views and recommendations, which we may then take to Cabinet to agree a policy and procedure to therefore manage that debt. I've laid out a draft procedure which you may wish to consider. However, the crux of the matter is not necessarily about the value of the debt to the authority overall, and the information which I provided in the report shows that at that point in time, whenever the report was, mid-May, I think, early May, the debt was actually £8,000, and that's on a gross income of that service of £950,000. So in that context, it's not a large figure. However, for individuals, there is an impact depending upon which approach we adopt. The process sets out, it suggests a series of letters and correspondence with the parent or guardian, followed by a meeting, and then a decision taken by a senior officer in relation to what the future of that service may be, in conjunction or in consultation with the Cabinet member for CYP. But the principle lies about the impact upon the child and how we should be managing that. To remove the service it immediately may be seen as draconian. However, do we allow this to continue, a debt to continue, or even escalate without some policy or procedure in place to endeavour to manage that debt? And that really is the issue around whether the meal is continued to be provided to the child, in our opinion, is a key matter in relation to this. This does not suggest that the service be withdrawn until a quite extensive process has been followed before any decision like that is contemplated. By doing so, we believe we'd be protecting the welfare of the child while still attempting to address the debt. Schools wish to know how this may be managed as well, because we've had suggestions that maybe the child, where a debt exists, maybe the child should be provided at least with a sandwich and a drink and a limited service. To do so, however, isolates that child. It would become apparent that that's an issue surrounding that child. So whilst that has come up as an option, we're not sat here recommending that that should happen, but it is an option which has been suggested. I hope my introduction is sufficient to at least open the debate for members in order that we can then take forward a decision to Cabinet.
Thank you very much, Mr Hoggins. Councillor Powell.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that, Roger. I think that the worst thing we could ever do would be to make some way, as you say, giving something different, and that poor child would be isolated. We can't have that. There's nothing worse than, nothing crueler than other children, and they say, oh, your parents can't pay. So that would be out of the question. I think one of the best things could be done is to actually speak to the parents, if it's at all possible, rather than just letters, to find out the reason why, because sometimes there is a reason why. It might not necessarily be that they haven't bothered. It might be that they can't cope with the electronically way of doing it and need help from that, or it might be that they've got into difficult circumstances which possibly the social services could aid and abet with, because people's incomes and circumstances do change. I don't think we should stop feeding the children. Obviously, you can't go on forever feeding them, because if you imagine it's escalating with loads and loads and loads. You wouldn't have the money to buy the food. So it's got to be managed. But I think that first off, we've got to try and find out the reasons why the parents are in this difficulty and impress upon them that it is really their responsible to feed their children, so that is why we need them to pay for the food. But I think you've got to be very careful, and I don't think giving that child anything different from any of the others. And I don't think they should go without their school dinner, because for many, many children in some areas, that's the only cooked meal that they ever get, because the parents either haven't had time or don't really know how to cook, and it is important they have their cooked meal for the day. So, all I want to know is follow on from that.
Thank you. A really very important point that you've raised there, Councillor Powell. Thanks. Yes, Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I mean, obviously, this has already been discussed. A sensitive issue, but I think looking at the recommendations that it would be actually better if the initial thing on page 19 actually included the first stage asking the school to investigate, because they know the parents better and they know the reasons as to why, and it may just be a simple factor of the problems with the PayPal system or whatever. The other sort of thing is that the school itself could look at just sending out a general letter to parents to say, we've noted, and then it wouldn't particularly single out anybody in particular, but they could say, we've noticed we've got a certain level of debt overall, and please ensure that if you've got any problems, contact so-and-so in the school. So if we start at that initial type of stage, I think, it would help, because there would be a more sympathetic approach, and it may be, just because somebody's actually forgotten that they need to update their payments. And so, in a sense, that's the sort of thing I think that we should really be looking at because it mentions about receives written advice and so forth. I think the onus should be first of all on the school to investigate and to look at it and see what they can do. And if there's variations between schools, then why is there variations, and has one school got a better practice in dealing with this issue than another school? So I think that sort of thing needs to be looked at first, so that the process places the emphasis where it should be in relation to the school and the parents who know and the school that knows the parents best and what the particular issues are. So it could be worked out fairly easily. Thank you.
Again, I should have mentioned at the outset that the schools are contacting parents or guardians by phone prior to entering into this process. So there is, at an early stage, they are endeavouring to settle the service. I think in relation to the point of individual schools having different practices is perhaps actually why we're sat here, because schools are looking for a consistent approach in how this is managed. For schools to adopt different processes may not actually be helpful. The other thing to point out is actually the school meals service is actually funded and managed through the LEA rather than by individual schools. So, and it's a discretionary service, but it is managed through the LEA rather than by individual schools. There inevitably has to be a relationship between the school, our catering service, and the LEA for it to work. But at the moment, schools are looking, actually, the schools which have raised it are looking to us to offer them a consistent approach, which helps them to manage it. And I suppose the other point to raise is that I mentioned it in the report, perhaps I should have emphasised it more, is the income comes to the authority, whereas the debt lies with the school. which seems a little incongruous, quite frankly, as to why it should be like that. And although it's not a recommendation, as officers, we would suggest that actually the debt ends with the LEA rather than with the school. So if that's helpful to members, may set some background. But at the moment, the schools are endeavouring to settle those accounts before it gets to the first stage.
Councillor Laura Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, on that, I mean, it's we were discussing in the pre-meeting. The schools do know the parents best, and they'll be aware why the particular parents can't pay, or what reasons there will be. But I was thinking, we were discussing about some schools obviously having one or two cases where their parents have got themselves in debt and paying for school meals. But there are other schools where it's pretty much nearly every pupil. Where there's £1,000 of debt in one particular school, for example. I mean, that's a lot of administrative work. I'm thinking for the receptionists, and if I was a governor of a local school near here, and I know that they would be reluctant to take any extra work because of their already heavy workload. So in that case, of them having to, is it the school receptionist's responsibility to keep chase and do all the letters? Or would they be able to have help if it's en masse in a particular school? Because obviously that's a lot of extra work to take on.
Yeah, the system will do some of the work for the administrator. So the way that Parent Pay works is that you set a limit of the lowest balance that you want to go to. So, for example, you'll set a balance of, say, £5. When your level gets to £5, you receive an email or a text, depending on your preference. So the parents actually set that up in the system. So they are getting reminders. They should be, yeah, it works. I use it and it works. So there is. I use it and it doesn't. Oh, right, okay. Well, I'll talk to you about it later. Yeah, but obviously, there is that in the system that allows you to go down to a certain level, and then it will remind you to set up to make a payment. The administrators are chasing the debt at the moment, and they know the families very well, and they know how to approach those families to a certain extent. I'm not advocating that they carry on chasing the debt when it gets to a certain level, but what I don't want to do is take that responsibility away initially, I think, from the schools, because if we go in with a heavy-handed approach, we don't know those families' circumstances, and that is my concern about taking that completely away from the school. However, once they've done the initial chasing and it's not working, that's when you hand it over to the local authority to say, could you help us on that?
Thank you for the clarification. Councillor Brown, and then Councillor Thomas, and then Councillor Watkins.
Yes, thank you. Just coming back on that, I mean, I think it would be useful if the recommendation did have some wording about, sort of the initial phone call, came from the school itself, because they're best placed to know the parents' circumstances. Because otherwise, it could be, far too, and it is a sensitive issue, and it could be far too, to go in with written a type of response may not be appropriate, and could be, settled very easily at that first particular hurdle. Thank you.
Councillor Thomas.
Thanks. Generally, and thanks, Roger, for the report. I mean, generally, I don't disagree with it, but I think for lots of families, the ones who are not within the free school meal range, who are above that, are probably struggling. It's not just an issue of IT, it's probably an issue of how much money is in the bank. And this authority took the decision to raise school meals quite substantially now, so to something like £2.45 per day. And if you had 3 children, that's £36.75 a week. That's £147 a month. And I'm sure schools who have high debt are probably schools in Monmouthshire which are in areas of much greater deprivation, and it does concern me in that way. But plus the fact that if you look at the overall budget, it's 1%. It's not a huge issue at the moment, and I think we've got to go sensitively. I know we're not going to adopt the sort of bread and water sort of routine. I certainly would not support that. We're going back to the days of Oliver Twist if we think along those lines. It's got to be dealt with sensitively. And at the end of the day, you've got to look at it. Most companies will not chase a debt now under £50 because it costs them more than £50 to chase the debt. So, you know, you've got to try and balance it all out, really. And it is a difficult issue. And I would have thought heads are probably the best ones to make some sort of decision unless it becomes a major, major issue.
Councillor Watkins, before you make your point, could you perhaps just introduce yourself for people who may be watching? I did explain that you'd be joining us slightly late.
Okay, I'm Jo Watkins, I'm County Councillor for Caldecott Castle. So my question is, has this situation got worse since parent pay was introduced? As you probably can tell already, I am a parent, I have to use parent pay. The school secretary and I spent an entire week phoning each other because I couldn't pay for a school trip via parent pay. And I am one of the good parents. She said, and there's not just you, there's quite a few of the parents who are the parents she would expect to normally be able to deal with these IT issues. So we're the competent ones, the engaged ones. And parent pay is a pain. It can really play up every now and then. Eventually, on my 5th or 6th attempt, I got to pay £10 for a school trip. But it took a lot of attempts. So I'm an engaged parent. I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to spend ages on the phone with the school secretary. There's a lot of parents out there who will be finding that degree of challenge far more than they can cope with. So has it got worse since parent pay was introduced? Or were these schools already the ones who had regular, consistent inability to pay their school dinners?
I don't know the level. I'd have to go back and look at the level of debt that we had prior to parent pay coming into place. My gut feeling is no, it hasn't got any worse. The reason we brought parent pay in, if I just explain the process before. The process before was that parents had to go into the school to pay with cash or cheque. The administrator was then on a Friday or 2 or 3 times a week leaving the office, going down to the bank, banking that money, and then there was a long, cumbersome process for us to actually bring it in. With parent pay, parents can pay online. It uploads very, very quickly to the account. You can see what your balance is on a daily basis before you'd have to go and ask in the school because there wasn't the system there available. Parents can still continue to pay with cash, and some do. They can also pay at, I believe it's PayPoint, where you go in. I don't know, some parents will use a card and maybe pay for gas and electricity. They can also top up meals as well at the same time. It will be rolled out in terms of, and some schools have started to do it for swimming trips, fruit tuck, school trips. I'm sorry to hear that you had an issue with that, but to be honest, our schools are not saying that parents are having an issue. I don't know whether it was a one-off or not, but we're not having that communication from schools to saying that it is a problem. I think they would be very upset if we were to take the system away from them, because in terms of the security that it offers, they're not taking cash down to the post office, they're not having to go out of the office 2 or 3 times a week to bank that cash, and the audit processes around it are a lot tighter.
Okay, follow up, Councillor Watkins.
I'm not suggesting you take parent pay away. No, on the whole, I think it's a great system. I'm just wondering, has it got worse specifically because of that, or is it still the same schools, the same issues? Because then maybe it needs to be addressed more specifically. If there are particular schools with particular problems, then maybe that needs to be looked at clearly in terms of what the solution is, rather than saying most of the schools are doing fine. Really.
I think there's, as I said, I'll have a look at that in terms of the debt, but looking at the list of schools with high debt were the list of schools with high debt prior to the system.
Councillor Woodhouse.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report, Roger. Can I just ask how many schools did actually ask for this consistent approach? Was it a large, not exact figures, but was it a large number of schools? And in that case, how are the ones that haven't got large amounts of debt managing it? Is there something we can learn from them? Were they involved in this process of putting these recommendations together? And then my last question is, in part 3 of the recommendations, where you refer to inviting people in to discuss why the debt exists, I realise you probably mean to discuss options and offer help, but could that be a bit more clear in that recommendation that it with a view to offering support as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The issue of school meal debt and the administration of school meal debt has come up repeatedly over recent times from head teachers and the collective primary school head teacher group as well. So it come up through their own collective meeting, which is referred to as MAPS. We discussed it again last week at the head teachers meeting and again on Tuesday this week. I think that they feel that there are some concerns around the provision of a meal or kind of the emergency meal as we've discussed, and I think the right decision's been made or direction has been set by this committee today. But it was more about the amount of time that it takes their administrators to administer and chase debt. That was their key area of concern, and actually addressing that. So one of the things which we've been doing in discussions with Roger and colleagues is to make sure that we find the appropriate point of time at which that kind of comes back to the local authority, and we recognise our role as a local authority in pursuing that debt. I think of the comments about the importance of the school in the first instance is right, and head teachers were receptive to that position when I met with them on Tuesday. But they know that the meeting's taking place today, and they know we'll be going back to them with feedback from this as well. In terms of, just one thing, in terms of the range of debt, it's not as clear-cut as perhaps has been suggested around schools with high levels of deprivation having high levels of debt. There is a mix of schools. We're very fortunate in that the vast majority of schools sit in a band no less than 100, but no more than about 400. Everything else beyond that is an outlier. So we're not talking about significant sums of money, and it wouldn't be easy to see a correlation between deprivation and school meal debt.
Okay, are there any other comments from members? Well, just to sum up then, I should have given our cabinet member a chance to speak. Councillor Jones, is there any points you'd like to make before we wrap up?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to reiterate, really, that I support the proposal that the debt should go back to the LEA and take it out of the hands of the schools, because the administrators are not paid to do this, and they have enough to do it. That doesn't mean to say I would cut out the first line of approach, but it's thereafter that the debt could be taken over, perhaps, as you are discussing. The other thing is the impact upon the child, of course, is very, very important from a safeguarding point of view, if nothing else. And there is no way that we'd have a cut-off point without anything else being put into place where the child was left without food or made to feel different in any way. This is a sensitive issue, and we have to deal with it sensitively. And I know that every child will be dealt with on an individual basis, or the parents or the guardians or whoever will be dealt with on an individual basis. So there's no one size fits all for all of this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Very briefly, because I was about to sum up.
Yeah, sorry, Chairman. I just wondered, in view of the suggestion about the first line being the school initially, and the very helpful suggestion about offering help and support. In terms of the recommendations, can we ask that officers and the cabinet member come up with appropriate wording for that to cover that point? Thank you.
Indeed, that was going to be the first comment I was going to make. So the summing up has already started, and if that could be taken as the first bit of this committee's recommendations. Members of the committee had also raised issues where specific schools were, in fact, already putting in place different practice where there was a debt. In terms of feeding children. I think this committee has made it very clear, as has the cabinet member, that there should be no discrimination against children for the debt of their parents. And if we could make that clear to head teachers, we fully accept that there has been a need for clarity. We are going as an authority to provide that clarity, and that now all head teachers should follow that guidance. and that where that has not been the case, we would hope that point would be made to those specific head teachers. The recommendation has set out a range of suggestions. I think the view of the committee is that they're very sensible. I think we should add to them that in the first instance the school should do its best to mention it and smooth it over before it gets to the local authority. And at the end of the day, as Mr. Hoggins pointed out, it's a local authority service, and the buck stops, I think, with the local authority. And I think as a committee we're happy to accept those proposals with perhaps just those one or two additions to make the practice clear as to how we would like to see it move on once it goes to Cabinet. So are we happy to accept the recommendations in the report with those very small additions? Okay, everybody is nodding, so I take that by general assent rather than voting. So thank you very much, and thanks for bringing that report to us, Mr. Hoggins. If we could move on then, the next issue on our agenda is an update on the Curbcraft initiative. So I believe we have officers who are... that's Mr. Hoggins again. Right, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Geraint is our acting road safety officer, and Geraint will be providing you with a presentation on how Curbcraft is being implemented now and how we are managing that service. To offer you some background as he sets up, members may recall an adverse report from Wales Audit Office in relation to how we've been managing Curbcraft, and particularly risks in relation to safeguarding of children. Following that report, an action plan was put together and adopted by Council, and we are now carrying on with the implementation of that action plan. One of the aspects was to bring reports to the nominated select committee, which was CYP, on performance of Curbcraft service, along with reports to Cabinet as well. It's at the discretion of your select committee to decide the frequency of that. Initially it was 6 monthly, and this is a 6-month report. You may wish to consider frequency thereafter. With that, Mr. Chairman, you have the report which provides the data, the performance information which we provided previously, but unless members want questions at this point, it may be of benefit that Geraint be allowed to provide the presentation on where we are with the service and how it's performing at the moment, and then perhaps take questions after with your agreement, Mr. Chair.
I think that's a very sensible way forward. I think there will be a very clear recommendation coming from the committee before we wrap up this discussion, but it would be great to have an update about where we are now. So over to you.
Okay, thanks for having me today. Yeah, it's just a quick update. It's not going to be death by PowerPoint, so just bear with us. So we're going to give a quick update on 2017, 2018. Some of you may have seen aspects of this already, but hopefully not too much. Okay, so Curbcraft is a practical road safety programme for foundation phase. So we're looking at from year 1, year 2 aged pupils, teaching 3 essential road safety skills. The training is progressive, with each phase building on the foundation laid by earlier phases, using practical training at the roadside around the school and the local community. Speaking to other local authorities, they deliver it slightly differently, but we're looking at the practical element of it rather than being based in the classroom. So safety first, we're looking at all Curbcraft trainers have current DBS Safeguard Level 1 qualifications, which is run by myself or Jane at our Curbcraft course. All Curbcraft trainers receive training in Curbcraft delivery prior to starting the training, with schools in accordance to the Curbcraft handbook. So any volunteers that come on board, Jane will meet with them, fill in all the DBS forms, put them on their level 1 safeguarding training, and then go through the handbook with them then how to deliver the training, and they'll go out and they'll team teach it until Jane's happy with their delivery. Once agreed, the school head teacher, once agreed with the school head teacher, a site visit is carried out and safe areas are identified within the locality of the school for the training to take place. So we know that children are going to be spending a lot of time within the community and walking to and from school within these areas. So we try and highlight areas that they are going to be using quite a lot. Some of them are high traffic areas, so we need to make sure that these children are used to crossing the road there and the safest places to cross. Permission slips go out to each child taking part and return prior to the training. No trial takes place without the permission slip coming back. And head teachers are provided with all the evidence of DBS safeguarding training prior to the start of the training. Trainers and children wear high-vis jackets at all times while taking part within the training. So the children learn by doing. Children will not learn road safety if they're not told how to behave. They need practice. The training therefore involves training by doing. Training takes place at the roadside with children in groups of 2 or 3, depending on the skill. So if it's a more enhanced or harder skill, we take them out 2 at a time. If it's a skill where we can take them out 3 at a time, we try to do that. It's all about pupil-centred learning. So a lot of it is following learning outcomes, but we do ask children for their feedback. We ask them where they think it's safe to cross, why it's safe to cross there, why it's safe to cross in certain places. Instructors guide the pupils to give the opportunities to discover the best crossing points. And we encourage the children to talk about and discuss problems between themselves. They often then go home after those conversations, have conversations with their parents, and they say, actually, we shouldn't be crossing here, or you shouldn't be letting me out on the roadside, I should be getting it onto the path. So it kind of gets through that good practice method that we're trying to teach them. Skill level 1, children make 2 common mistakes when crossing the road. They do not realise that it's unsafe to cross near obstacles such as parked cars, rubbish skips or large hedges. They also think it's okay to cross at sharp bends, browser hills and complicated junctions. We try and offer good practice and we tell them why or show them why they can't cross these places, and we get those answers out of them during the training. So at the end of this, they should be able to cross away from obstacles and understand why they need to cross away from obstacles. And then we also train them not to cross the road diagonally because they're spending longer on the road. So we've got lots of little activities that the children do to get these messages across. Skill 2, crossing at parked cars, when we should cross between parked cars, how to cross at parked cars, and then we practice together. So again, as you've seen, I'm sure, during school, or before school and after school, all the cars parked up the road with nowhere for them to cross safely. We teach them how to cross between parked cars as safely as possible. Then level 3, crossing near junctions. Junctions can pose a problem for several reasons, as you are all aware. And then there's 3 different types of junctions. Again, we try and highlight these 3 different junctions to the children within the vicinity of their school. So that's a little stat that we've got at the moment for this year. So at the moment, by the end of this year, we would have trained 720 children across Monmouthshire. That's 71% of year 1 and 2s across 23 schools, using 3 paid members of staff and 5 volunteers. Which, if you ask me, that's a fantastic amount of children getting through, considering we've only got 8 members of staff that are going out and deliver this across the whole of the year. Feedback forms are sent out to parents and staff members to reflect on the Carecraft delivery, so we can forever change it and mould what we're delivering. Each school in Monmouthshire is different, so we try to make sure that what we are delivering is in line with the handbook, but also caters to the need of that school. So some of the feedback we've had from parents while supporting and from volunteers and teachers, while supporting children doing Carecraft, I was able to observe that all children involved it thoroughly. One-to-one child who was not very vocal during class joined in and was able to answer the questions and really get involved. This was lovely to witness. So it shows our programme is actually inclusive as well. We get any pen pictures that come through, or any children that do have one-to-one support. We find out why they have that one-to-one support and what we can do to ensure they can take part in the programme prior to going in. Year 1 have been taking part in Carecraft over the past term and really look forward to the session. We went out for a walk around the local area and noticed a big difference during our recent walk in how sensible and how road conscientious the children were. So some of the schools are now actually developing our programme and going out themselves afterwards, whether it be walking to swimmer lessons or walking to another area, and they're actually seeing a difference in the children and how they're behaving at the roadside. We got some feedback from the head teacher as well, which I won't read out because it's quite lengthy, but we've got Mr. Brunsden, who's a big advocate of our programme, and then we've also got Mrs. Rowlands at Raglan Primary School, one of the new head teachers, who again has come across from Torfaen and seen a massive how important the programme is in our delivery in Monmouthshire. I've got a quick video for you to watch. It's from Ysgolyn, and it kind of speaks for itself, really.
This morning we're at Ysgolyn and we're taking the children from year 2 out for Kirkcraft.
Is there a way of making this?
Kirkcraft gives the children practical experience
Bear with me.
situations that they would come across.
Is there an audio lead on that?
Is this?
Yeah.
Is it?
Goes in the headphones.
At the roadside.
Right.
It teaches the children. This morning we're at Ysgolyn and we're taking the children from year 2 out for Kirkcraft. Kirkcraft gives the children practical experience of situations that they would come across at the roadside.
All right, hang on.
Come out of the presentation and use this screen duplicator and do it then. So if you go up to the YouTube window now.
YouTube window.
Onto the actual where it's playing. So onto your
Click on that link, is it?
It's not on the link. It's
So if you go to the
Can you use the link? Copy the link and paste it in. And then go into
This morning we're at Ysgolyn and we're taking. This morning we're at Ysgolyn and we're taking the children from year 2 out for Kirkcraft. Kirkcraft gives the children practical experience of situations that they would come across at the roadside. It teaches the children how to keep themselves safe for independent travel in the future. Kirkcraft is a national scheme and is offered to all primary schools in Monmouthshire. Can you tell me where we look first before we cross the road? Right. And then? Left. And then back. Can you tell me in Welsh where we look? And then?
Dwi'n hoffi mynd I Kirkcraft achos mae'n cadw ni'n diogel. Dwi'n hoffi Kirkcraft it's safe.
Could have just shown that video, really, couldn't I? But
says it all, doesn't it?
and that's what happens. When we go to quite a lot of schools. I help out when I can, so I go to 3 schools a week as well as kind of doing some other stuff. And that's the response we get from the children in every school that we go to. They can't wait to take part. What is it? No, I shouldn't do that. Okay, there's only one slide left anyway. So what's next with the programme? As you noticed, there were some schools missing. We got some schools that we aren't working with at the moment, and it's because the handbook doesn't lend itself to working within those schools. So take Newton, for example. We haven't got the roads opposite, or we haven't got the crossing areas that we can actually use this programme at the moment. What we're doing at the moment is developing a Kirkcraft Plus programme between myself and Jane, where we're looking to adapt the programme so we can deliver it in the likes of Newton, Trellick, Crosshash, so they are getting this road safety education that's so fundamentally important. We're making the programme accessible for all, so we're working a bit further now, so we're looking to work with adult education. So again, when they walk in the groups of adults with special education needs down into the town centres, we're looking to do some stuff with them now, so we're training some of the mentors and how to deliver the Kirkcraft programme. So it's not a case of them walking them down there. These adults then are actually having a say in how they cross the road, where they cross the road, and so on. And we're also looking to develop some additional activities for Year 6, because we are aware that Kirkcraft runs in Year 2, and after that there's very little or no road safety education. We're looking at working with Year 6 groups now through a transition phase. So the ones that are walking to school in Year 7, we're going to be looking at what roads they'll be crossing, how can they cross those roads safely, what should they be doing to cross those roads when they're walking with their friends. And the only other bit of feedback we have got a programme that we're working with the leisure service on at the moment. So we are aware that children are walking 10-15 minutes a day. Some of them are coming back and they are out of breath, or they are feeling like they've done some form of physical activity. And It is a form of some of the physical activity that they do in a day. So some of our volunteers and staff now are wearing Fitbits, and we're seeing if it is going to impact on some of the physical activity that's taking part as a byproduct of what we're doing, without losing the key messages of road safety and being safe at the curbside. That's what we're looking at the moment. It is a forever changing programme, very much sticking to the handbook, but we are looking to adapt, change and grow the programme to make sure it's accessible for everyone in schools and through the community programmes that we've got as well. Is there any questions or...
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that.
No
very
problem.
interesting. Councillor Laura Jones to kick off.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation and all that you're doing. As a mother myself of a young child who's using the programme, I very much welcome it. As your feedback suggests, it's welcomed by the schools, but it's also and parents, and also the children themselves, who are clearly listening to what you're teaching them and what the scheme is doing. So anything to enhance their safety is good. I also, I'm sure it'll be touched on by the local member in a minute, but it's great to see that you're adding on to the scheme by Curbcraft Plus, by looking into those schools that haven't got a natural surrounding, which enables them for you to deliver the scheme. So that's great that you're doing that. As a committee in our pre-meeting, though, we did discuss, we are a bit concerned about schools that fall into the red category. There's a particular school I'm thinking of, which I won't mention, but that hasn't taken up the scheme. That concerns us because obviously they're a red category school, and I think that they would benefit from this scheme. And particularly where that school is located, I would have thought that it would be very beneficial to them and the children, being in such a built-up area. We do find it worrying, and we would like to know what you're doing to encourage that school and other schools like it to take up the scheme. What are you actively doing? Because it is important, I think, that schools like that particularly aren't left out. And we as a committee would like to recommend that we look to address this as soon as you can, please.
Yeah, completely agree. What we are looking to do now is put a bit of a case study or a portfolio together, what's gone on this year, and almost promote it through that way of how we deliver, really. A lot of the stuff now, we are on the Monmouthshire Road Safety is now on Twitter, and we find that schools kind of like to be in the limelight a bit, so we do kind of play schools off each other in a way on there and show what they're doing.
Mr Hoggins, and then Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. A point well made by members that we should try and introduce this wherever possible. As Geraint mentioned, he's working on Curbcraft Plus. I suspect I understand the other issues which members are referring to, and perhaps either I or Will or both of us could write to that school urging them to take up the scheme.
Thank you very much for that offer. It is a cause of concern for this committee. Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I was looking, I'm extremely pleased about the work that you're doing because, first of all, I should say how important it is for children's safety, so that they know how to cross the road properly. And, in that sense, it is, a life-saving scheme. I was looking at the... as I'm a detail person, I tend to look at the detail. On page 47, there's a sort of a table with different colours. I'm not quite sure what the different colours for the schools represent. One of the areas that I'm concerned about is obviously the red school areas, which I think you've already talked about in relation to Curbcraft Plus, which again was the question I was going to ask. I obviously come from the Shire Newton ward and do appreciate that the rural nature of the location of the school may make it difficult for the standard Curbcraft programme, but I just wondered whether or not, obviously in liaison with the school, there are other schools in the Chepstow cluster, such as the Dell, where there's a clear pavement you can cross over, and I just wondered whether or not there could be coordination with the schools, maybe a minibus going from the rural schools to areas where the sites are better to practice curbcraft. And the other issue is in these rural areas, in terms of the development of Curbcraft Plus, there is actually, obviously road safety implications in relation to those locations, because in Shire Newton there are areas where, particularly in the centre of the village and so forth, where there are no pavements at all because of the design of the village. And I think it would be useful if there was discussion in terms of, what's the best thing to do when a car approaches in those type of situations for safety. I mean, the natural thing is that, you stand in single file by the side of the road as opposed to carry on walking 3 or 4 abreast, and I think those sort of issues could be addressed as well. In other words, specific rural curbcraft concerns, that wouldn't necessarily be dealt with by your standard crossing the road as such. And I just wondered if that was something that could be developed in discussion with the schools. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for that, Councillor. There's some very valid comments there that I think we need to take away and consider further. Previously, we did arrange for minibuses to transfer some of the children to a more urban environment, so they would be able to gain those skills. There is a considerable cost, obviously, in terms of how getting the transport and transporting the children to and from, and the time taken, and that is an issue that we do struggle with, because obviously there is a limited budget that we have from the Welsh Government for this service. So that's something we do need to consider, but we have previously taken children into an urban environment and followed sort of the suggestions that you're making. And we'll need to review that, as well as perhaps, as Roger said, expanding it to the schools that haven't taken it up.
Thank you for that reassurance. From the chair, I would like to emphasise that although we appreciate as a committee that there would be a cost, the alternative might be the cost of a child's life. And I don't think we can compare those two. Mr. Fowler.
Hi. Just thinking back to how Curbcraft came onto our radar, if you like, and it was over issues of DBSs and whatnot, and then there was the scheme of volunteers used. I noticed that you've now got 5 volunteers. I just wonder what the churn has been like of those volunteers over the year, or has it been fairly static, and how you're finding managing a core team like that?
Okay, so the 5 volunteers we got, it's very manageable in how it is. As part of the risk assessment, we said we wouldn't go over 7 volunteers to make it a manageable group. Looking at other areas, they got far more volunteers we got, but we're finding working with the 5 that we've got, we can depend on them. We know that they've got everything in place, and we know they're part of the programme because they want to be. So working with those 5, it's been pretty streamlined. In all fairness. We have talked about taking more volunteers on and been doing a bit of a recruitment drive, but we want to make sure that we've got everything in place and that we're comfortable before we do that. The main programme, the Curbcraft programme, is the priority, and we need to make sure that what we're delivering is as good success in the tin. So at the moment, quite happy with what we got.
And has there been much fluidity in those volunteers, or has that core team just stayed with you the whole year? Crossing the roads many times.
Yeah, so we've had 4 involved for the whole year, and 1's recently come on board as part of the programme. We have had some interest from other people who want to be involved in the programme, but those conversations are ongoing to make sure, one, that they're correct for the programme, that they can commit, because what we don't want is for them to come 1 or 2 weeks and then they can't do it for some reason or another. We want that consistency involved in the programme.
Thank you very much. Councillor Woodhouse.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just say how much we appreciate what you're doing and all the good work, because it really is, I know you've achieved a great deal, and you're making it enjoyable for the young people. That's coming over loud and clear. I've just got a couple of questions. I was going along the same theme as Mr. Fowler about volunteers, because obviously we might be able to help in that respect. If we know of people, we could point in your direction. I know I did point one in your direction with regard to cycling proficiency. is it a big commitment for volunteers? And my second question is, just clarification really, schools that couldn't accommodate the sessions offered, is this because of the timing of it, or is there another reason that, I mean, obviously it's time when you go back again, I can appreciate that, but, or is there another reason for that?
Okay, so in terms of the volunteers, firstly, thank you for putting me in touch with Dave. He's been fantastic, and actually his wife's come on board and wants to be part of the Curbcraft programme, so that's brilliant. The schools that we're having some issues with, a lot of the time it's because the morning session is taken up with literacy, maths, and so on, so they only want afternoon sessions. And with the members of staff we've got in place at the moment, we cannot offer just afternoon sessions across the board. So that's one of the problems. The schools that really buy into the programme, we have some schools who will take the morning quite happily because they value the programme. And some of the other schools, it's just it just doesn't fit in with the time that they have at the moment. So we're looking at what we can do to change that.
Okay, have we got any further comments on Curbcraft before we wrap up? Okay, well, in that case, again, if I could thank officers involved. It's been 12 months since the committee first saw the steps that were being taken to get this scheme back onto a proper and safe footing, and I would commend all of those people who have been involved with it. Looking at it now, we're in a very different place, I think. And we've heard testament from members of the committee as to the effectiveness of the training that's provided. So from the chair, if I could thank you, and if you could pass that on to those people who you work with who administer it at the schools. There are recommendations. I would like to emphasise the final recommendation there, which is that in future we no longer require a 6-monthly monitoring. I think members are now more than happy with the safeguarding elements here, and indeed with the way that the scheme is being run generally, and we would like to emphasise that as the scheme goes forward now to Cabinet. But generally, are we as a committee happy to take on board the recommendations in the report? Yeah, is that carried unanimously? Thank you very much indeed, and thank you to those who've made the presentation. Councillor Brown.
Yeah, sorry. Could I add? We didn't really clarify. You mentioned about the 6-month monitoring. Are you suggesting some sort of change in the time period? Because I wasn't quite clear in what you were saying there. Because obviously we do need. To continue, particularly, in relation to schools where it's difficult to implement. We do need some feedback on how it's going, in a sense, to encourage officers as well in their endeavours in this regard. So I wasn't quite clear what you were suggesting there. Thank you.
My suggestion, I think, in line with officers is that it should become an annual report back to this committee. But certainly if we have asked specific questions about specific schools and the uptake, if we could just get perhaps a quick verbal response to that. But that our monitoring task, which was given to us 12 months ago, I think that this committee now believes that the arrangements are safe and secure, and that the reasons why we were given that responsibility have been very satisfactorily dealt with. So we will now certainly continue to monitor, but it will be on an annual basis.
Presumably with a verbal in between. Thank you.
Okay, well, if we can move on then. The next item, number 7, is a verbal report, and this is in the context of the current public consultation which is going on around the provision of additional learning needs around Monmouthshire. So, Mr. McLean, when you're ready, and I'll pass over to you.
Thank you, Chair. This is a verbal report, and as you correctly say, we are mid-consultation at the moment. But it did feel like an opportune time to report back to committee some of the emerging themes that have come out. Hopefully committee members will recall we brought the emerging findings of the review in October 2017. We brought then the actual model back in February of this year, prior to it being discussed at Cabinet early in March. And the formal consultation process began on the 16th of April for the period that was necessary, which takes us up to the 27th of May. So we are in the midst of that. Obviously, we've been accepting written comments from people who have an interested perspective on our plans and changes for children with additional learning needs and inclusion services. But the heart of what we've been doing is our visits to schools to discuss the changes with staff, with governors, and with parents and public. So far to date, we've undertaken 6 visits. We've visited Mountain House Special School, Caldecott Comprehensive. We've undertaken a session with the Pupil Referral Service, which is obviously an in-house service. We've been to Derry View School, to Pembroke Primary in Chepstow, and last night colleagues attended Monmouth Comprehensive. We have 3 visits remaining, King Henry and Chepstow Comprehensives, and Over Mono, which will take place this evening. The sessions have worked very well. We've done an hour with staff from 3:30 till 4:30, then an hour with governors at 4:30, and then however long parents and public want at 5:30. I'm grateful to the work that colleagues in the department have put in to all of those sessions to make sure they're running very smoothly. If I go through those 3 groups of stakeholders, that will perhaps be the best way to illustrate some of the emerging comments. I'll talk in general terms because I don't want to preempt anything that might yet come out from the consultation or anything that we may choose to do on the conclusion of the consultation period. With regards to the staffing cohort, the main concern where schools have an existing special needs resource base is around employment. People are naturally concerned around changes to creations of new schools and to transfers. I think in the vast majority of cases we've been able to give them very clear reassurances about the protection of employment. And that hasn't caused any issues at all. And in fact, for a number of areas, we're actually talking about developing our service and extending our provision. So actually, it's a question of growth rather than constraint of employment. There are expected questions around responsibility and accountability in a school. If on a school site there were to be in essence 2 lines of accountability, one for the special school and one for the mainstream school. What we've always said to teachers and leaders at that point is that this is a consultation on the model, so we're not claiming at this point to have the detail worked up, but actually that detail is something which we would look to co-produce with the schools to make sure that we are very clear about how those responsibilities would lie. However, I think the underpinning of the whole solution and the whole proposal is that there are much clearer sets of expectations around entry and exit criteria than we have currently. Even at the moment where schools house their own SNRBs, we don't have absolute clarity around some of those accountabilities. So that should definitely be a positive step for us. With regard to governors, clearly a very important stakeholder group, their concerns kind of lie very clearly into that kind of last gambit I referred to from the staffing structure around who is the responsibility, how will that work, and so on. Governors have been very engaged. I think they've been supportive of the development. I think they recognise the need to change the provision that we have in Monmouthshire and recognise some of the deficits that we have at the moment. As I say, key concerns are around the areas of responsibility and accountability. I think one of the things which is providing people with comfort is that this is not a new model. So although we haven't simply kind of cut and paste it, Trinity Fields in Caerphilly and Maes Ebu in Newport both operate on a very similar basis. So that's been able to give people some level of assurance about that it can be successful. Interestingly, the group which had the potential to be the most contentious have, I think, across the board been the most supportive, and that's been the parents. I think there have been some initial concerns from parents whereby there was potentially a misunderstanding about what we were seeking to achieve through the consultation. I think there was a worry for some parents that we were going to create a new school, i.e. that would be a new building and all children with an identified need or with challenging behaviour would simply be relocated to that school. Clearly that is not what we're intending on any level, and I think once that reassurance has been given, parents have been very supportive of it. The one area which I think was always going to be difficult was for those parents whose children have what in the terminology would be determined as moderate learning needs. In the new the new legislation, the new Additional Learning Needs and Tribunal Act, and the expected code of practice, the sense is that moderate learning needs should be met to a far greater extent within the mainstream. Now, one of the great deficits of our model at the moment is that our secondary SNRBs are predominantly for children with moderate learning needs, whereas our primary SNRBs have a much broader range of designations. So we have a very broad range of designation at primary, and that comes very tight then at secondary school, specifically for moderate learning needs. So we've got a surfeit of one type of provision when actually we need a greater amount of the broader provision. So that's been one of the things that parents have asked us questions about, and again that will be us working with the schools to make sure that everybody understands that there will be a sliding scale of engagement between the SNRB and the mainstream depending on that child's abilities and depending on that child's needs. And that's the kind of the critical point there. In terms of the rest of the process and where we go next, we'll continue with the public meetings. They conclude next Thursday, the 24th in Chepstow. The public consultation closes on the Sunday evening at midnight. We then go into I suspect will be a fairly frenetic period of kind of pulling together all of those consultation responses. We've been meeting as we've gone through the consultation window to make sure that it's not all left to the last period. We report back to Cabinet the findings of the consultation on the 3rd of July. I think that's the Wednesday. From that point, Cabinet will then provide us with a position as to how they want us to proceed. If they want us to proceed with the preferred model as set out in the consultation document, that will then be progressed early in September with the publication of statutory notices. After that, there's a 28-day window for objection by anybody who's interested. And after that, it comes back in, and final decision would be on the 7th of November by Cabinet. So it's a fairly tight timeline, but it needs to be a tight timeline to make sure that we get the correct provision in place for our children. That's a very, very quick canter through where we are, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Okay. Any members of the committee with comments or questions? Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I wanted to say that the local community council have given very positive responses, and I did actually go along to one of the Mountain House open evenings, and it was very good to hear from the pupils about how positive they were about the school. And I think there was a reassurance there for some of the pupils that their education would continue. And I think possibly in hindsight, the wording of the consultation document shouldn't have necessarily said that the school would close in April 2019 and then the new school will be in September 2019, because it should have had a sentence in there to give reassurance to say that the existing pupils would continue, and I think that was something that was discussed. I'm not quite clear what the age range is, because I'd be interested to hear exactly what that is, because I think it's primary to secondary, but also I think I'm not sure if that's 5 to 16 or 5 to 19, because in the consultation document it mentioned about 18 or 19, but I think when it was discussed that particular evening, 16 was mentioned. I understand my concerns really centre around how practical practically the teaching arrangement is going to be arranged. I mean, I understand that there's going to be 16 primary school and 16 secondary school pupils there, but and they're going to be in separate blocks, and that's for SEBD children, which is basically socially emotional behaviour difficulties. You know, obviously we use these phrases, but it's important to know what they are. And then there's going to be a satellite PR unit based there, and I'm not quite sure how physically the PR unit will mix with the SEBD, because obviously the SEB is on one range of the behavioural scale, and you know the PRU is at another end, and obviously we want to make sure that you know that there isn't learning from other pupils towards a more extreme end of the behavioural spectrum, and I think you know that's a concern. In terms of practicalities, I'm sorry I'm going through quite a lot, but there's quite a lot I wanted to mention about this. The rooms themselves are locked and they have a key system, but in practicalities, a fob system would be much better. And I'm also concerned about the timetable in terms of it being possibly very ambitious, because if the pupils are continuing from April, the existing pupils, then in a sense, if it's going to open in September, there is really only going to be that short period in the summer to actually make changes that are needed. And I think it's important that the actual layout of the school is thought about, and how you divide the different teaching areas. It is going to be a teaching challenge, because you are dealing with all age ranges and all sexes, whereas currently it's boys at Key Stage 3 and 4 on SEBD, and the report itself talks about invest to save, and that more pupils, for example, girls won't necessarily be going out of borough, and they would be able to have in-borough provision. But in terms of the financial side, there don't seem to be a great deal of details on that, and the consultation fails to make that the revenue from existing out-of-borough pupils hasn't been taken account of. So, for example, there are about 33 existing pupils, 25 who come out of borough, but there are 39 pupils that we send out of borough. So, you know, the difference is 39 minus 25 equals 14, and the consultation fails to mention that. And the other area that I would have liked a little bit more about would be the well-being of pupils. Is this you know, although the Chief Officer has mentioned this being a successful model in other schools, I'm not, you know, I would have liked a little bit more detail of how it's operated, and, you know, because obviously in other areas they have had more single-sex schools based on particular key stages. So obviously that is you know, something that needs to be looked at. So I've got a lot of questions. I mean, on the one hand, I don't think these questions are unsurmountable, but it will be interesting to know a bit more feedback in relation to the practicalities of how it's going to operate, and how you know, the issues of the teaching side, and whether this is the best teaching model. But I would underline the fact that I think it is a positive development, and I don't want to what I've said to be put across as something that isn't positive. It is, but I do think these particular areas do need to be ironed out, for in terms of how it will practically operate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown, and don't apologise for the length of time. There's serious issues that you've raised, and I know you have raised them with me in another forum before we had a chance to put the questions to our Chief Officer. If I could just try and summarise for clarity in my own mind, really, what the things you've been asking. Firstly, there was a worry about the mixture of types of schooling there, that there's going to be a specific special school for children with behaviour, emotional, social difficulties on the same site as a pupil referral unit, and that there may be a conflict there. Then there is the issue about the day-to-day running of the site, and that FOBs might be an easier way of managing the site than keys. That's about technology on the site, I guess, isn't it? Then there was the issue that you raised about simply the timetable for getting the buildings into a position where they can deliver what the plans are suggesting. You raised the issue of the loss of income from out-county placements, and then a more general philosophical point about the range of age, the two genders being mixed together, and whether that would work. Mr. McLean, I hope that you think that's what Councillor Brown was talking about, and would you like to respond? Thanks.
Of course, thank you, Chair. I was a bit worried my scribbles were getting less and less legible, so that's helpful. If I take them through, not necessarily in the same order, if that's okay. So in terms of picking off the ones which are relatively easier to answer, in terms of the site and things like how buildings are accessed, etc., I think we'd certainly consider that as part of the investment. We're very clear that the significant investment will have to be made in the Mountain House site in order to make sure that it's fit for purpose for the extended age range and for the fact that it will meet the needs of both boys and girls. So certainly that one I can answer straight away. The timetable, I can see how that query has arisen. We've been very clear in all of my narrative, in all of my kind of presentation pieces, that the new SEBD element of the new special school will not start until September. So we probably just need to reflect on what we've included in the written document. We've been very clear about that point all the way through. It was a key piece of reassurance for the children who were present at the consultation event in Mountain House, and there's no problems with that at all. Including that, and just jumping back to a point that Councillor Brown did raise around the issue around the age range, one of the things which was really positive was that we had a couple of students present at the parents and public session in Mountain House, and they were very keen to see the extension of the age range of that school up to 19 from its present cut point of 16. So that post-16 provision, there is some post-16 provision available by Coleg Gwent, but that's out of county. So actually thinking about how we might develop that in conjunction with the new centre in Caldecott, which has 5 places for post-16 learning, would be something which we could potentially look at through the consultation responses. So I'm grateful for that. In terms of the loss of income, I think just to be clear on some of those numbers and what our intention is and the implication. So absolutely correct that Mountain House currently has 33 pupils, 25 of whom are from out of county. Of those 25, only 3 are residential at the moment. So residential is definitely a part of the schooling provision there, which is reducing in terms of its popularity. We've been very clear with our partners who place children in Mountain House that the school will continue as a day school, and there would not be any need for those children to be moved from their current provision. The point that Councillor Brown makes is that what we have not taken into account of in our financial modelling or preparation for this change is that any child would come back from their current provision. We're very clearly of the view that to disrupt a child's education by removing them from a setting where they were settled and were receiving their education would not be in their best interests. So this will be a model which will see over time out of county children moving on from Mountain House, as you would expect, as they complete their education, and over time, but gradually, children starting in Mountain House who are currently in our schools earlier, so they're reaching the point in which they need to be in Mountain House, or for a small number of children in the primary phase, they will be beginning there from September onwards. So the primary phase won't impact on the current cohort, so that's an important balance for us to remember. So we're not seeking to bring children back, because that would be very disruptive to them. So we do have what looks like a very tight window of implementation. We do then have what I suspect will be quite a long window in terms of the actual implementation of the change itself, because the change won't be immediate. And that's one of the things we've been trying to say, particularly to some of the new settings. It won't happen on the 1st of September or the 1st of April. Those settings won't go to full suddenly. This will take time in order for them to fill up, for the children to be identified and to be placed. The point around the PRU and the special school mixture, there is a considerable amount of space on the Mountain House site. The way that our PRU works, and it works very successfully at the moment, is by working with children in different settings. So sometimes they have a very mixed timetable provision. They will receive college education, work-based learning at some points, and then have other times at a base, depending on where they are in their education. So we will be looking to make sure that, again, that it's not just an all-in. We are acutely aware of the safeguarding requirements and the provision having to make sure that the younger children are kept safe and away from some of the older children, and the PRU will be no different to that. It is, however, too good an asset for us not to use fully in the south of the county, because one of the things which we have learnt is that those children who do engage with the PRU, and they tend to engage with the PRU for a short fixed term, hopefully, although some children will be on the role of the PRU for a longer term, the kind of the step up, step down model does work better when children actually get the opportunity to move away from the school where the challenging behaviour is an issue at that time. So that's a key area there for us. I think a lot in terms of the age and the gender mix. The age, I think, will be primarily around the physical management of the site and so on. The gender mix at secondary level will present some challenges to the teaching staff there. It will be new for the boys there. I think it was one of the comments that came up in that evening, certainly in Mountain House. One of the boys felt that conflict might arise should girls arrive. And that was one of the comments he made. Just to make a point, though, in terms of the well-being of pupils and gaining their perspectives, colleagues Emma Taylor and Rhian Cook have been to every school that will be affected and undertaken a significant amount of pupil voice work with the children to make sure that we haven't lost sight of what they feel about the changes that we're proposing. That was featured heavily in terms of the time they spent at Mountain House. Interestingly, I think I've been at every session we've had apart from the one in Monmouth Comprehensive last night where I had a clash and I couldn't be there. I'm yet to see the feedback from the children, so I am looking forward to that. And that will be a really interesting litmus test for us.
Thank you for that detailed answer. Councillor Brown, you want to come back?
Yeah, I think effectively what you're saying is that this is a proposal, in relation to September 2019, but it will gradually happen over time, because obviously the thing is that once in terms of admitting primary and secondary pupils, because you've got to have the different blocks, then in a sense that can't really happen until you've sort of done the appropriate changes to the layout. And so I think obviously if that's the case, then the timetable may be less ambitious than it was, but I don't think there's any particular answer that's being given as to whether or not there might need to be the sectioning of the site in terms of the different teaching needs for, you know, PRU and SEBD, or, you know, for example, different ages and so forth. I just wonder, I mean, that's something that the detail and the flexibility of the accommodation needs to actually look at, and I'm not quite sure. I mean, I know that will be, you know, a drawing board sort of thing, but I still think that that's important, you know, because of the points made in relation to PRU and SEBD, and you know, obviously the PRU satellite, although it's a small number, you know, you have got primary and secondary, but you know, you've got pupils with different needs from SEBD and ASD, and obviously in many senses you've got a very you know, it's going to be certainly a great teaching challenge for the people who are managing that sort of thing. Thank you.
I'd like to bring in Councillor Powell, and then if members are content, and then Councillor Watkins, and then we'll wrap it up if that's okay. So firstly, Councillor Powell, then Councillor Watkins, and then we'll conclude.
Just briefly, Councillor Brown was concerned about the boys and girls being together. Sorry, excuse me. My grandson's just finishing now at a special school in Kent, and there are girls and boys together there, and it seems to work all right. After all, we have families are mixed, boys and girls. When they go out into the world, which we are teaching them to manage to go out in the world, they'll be mixing with boys and girls. And I think, you know, the sooner they can be brought together and learn to respect each other then, I think the better. If you keep them isolated, it's going to be more of a shock.
Thank you, Councillor Powell. I must admit my own mixed education has given me good preparation for sitting on a table with powerful women up here. Councillor Watkins.
Thank you. So I'd just like to ask you to elaborate a little bit on your mention of the moderate learning difficulties and the fact that the provision will change from primary to secondary, and could you elaborate more? What do you mean by moderate learning difficulties, just so that we're all on the same page about that? And then, obviously, our primaries take great care of our children and they have an awful lot of TA support. And what is the provision going to be for moderate learning difficulties at secondary level?
In terms of what the provision will be in the future, and this is one of the things, so the introduction of the new model will not negate the provision that is there currently. So if children, although I have to caveat that with the significant change that will come about with the new legislation. So if children are currently statemented, or they have a school action, a SAPRA indeed, a school action plus resource allocation, then that will remain. And the resource, in terms of how we've constructed the financial model for that, remains in place for them in school. So it might well be that we look to use that more innovatively. We might look to use that in smaller groups rather than one-to-ones and so on. So that would be the type of thing we do there. Moderate learning needs can cover a whole range of things. So it might be children in some instances who are on P levels, which are the levels prior to the levels which we normally understand and expect children to achieve. It might be children in secondary school who are achieving level 1 or a 2, whereas our expectation of a child leaving primary school would be at a level 4. So there is that kind of breadth in terms of the type of need that a child might present. I think what we're very clear about is that we hope to see significant integration between the two models, so the base and the mainstream. I think that's a really positive aspect to it, so that if children have moderate learning needs, we'd like to see them in mainstream as much as possible, but recognise that there may be times with some types of provision, it's better that they spend some time within the base as well. So that's where some of that complexity in terms of the responsibility, in terms of the absolute clarity around the entry and exit criteria is really important. We get that nailed down very clearly, very early on. I understand why the type of provision that's been developed in schools like Caldecott at the moment gives parents a significant degree of comfort when their children transition from primary into secondary. What's interesting is that provision only lasts 2 years in Caldecott. So, so we just need to work all of those things through, and we have to look at that against the new code of practice, which will be out, so as far as I'm aware, kind of autumn time, which will give us a real sense around what the code of practice expectations are around moderate learning needs. Although the expectation is very clear at the moment that it should be less around a very specialist type provision and more about better support in an integrated mainstream setting. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, and thank you for your time this morning, Mr. McLean, to come and enable us to take part in this consultation process. I would ask officers if the notes and minutes from this morning could be added to the consultation documentation that you've received. Otherwise, I think the recommendation is that we note and accept the report this morning. So thank you very much indeed. If we could move on then to agenda item 8, which I know has been discussed in other places, and this is the transfer of free school meal entitlement assessment from education to revenue and benefits. And this has come about largely because of the rollout of universal benefit and the experience in Torfaen that when it has been moved to revenue and benefits, the take-up of free school meals has risen by around 20%. And that obviously then is a great help because it brings in additional support that can then be used for those schools where the children are claiming free school meals to support their wider learning. So that's the rationale for the move. We're not suggesting for 1 minute that our people aren't good enough or anything like that. But the report that we have this morning is from Ms. Wellington. Would you like to introduce it? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for giving the background to the report in terms of that we have been looking at this for a while now, and very successfully within Torfaen, when they moved it from education into the shared benefit service, they did see an increase. We're not suggesting that Monmouthshire will have a 20% increase. From talking to colleagues in Torfaen, they are expecting around about a 9% increase, but even so, any percentage increase will be a benefit to the authority and, more importantly, a benefit to the families that are entitled to this. Torfaen have said that naturally they felt that 50% of the increase would have happened anyway through the rollout of universal credit, and 50% was due to the targeting that they did. The criteria for free school meals is the same across Wales. It is set by Welsh Government, so therefore they'll be working with the same criteria as they would in Torfaen as they do for Monmouthshire. The benefit to this is that obviously they know those families, they're working within the benefit service, and they can see what those families are entitled to, and then they can target the families. We don't have that information. We rely on families passing in application forms to us. We rely on schools interacting with families and asking them to apply if they are entitled. So therefore this is more of a proactive approach than we can currently do. Obviously, top on everyone's agenda, GDPR, that was coming in later at the end of this month. Again, Torfaen will have sought legal advice, and we will do the same, and there is a way forward in terms of moving that service across. We would, of course, be telling our families that we will be moving, the families that we know of, the existing families, that we'll be moving that across to the shared service. Just for information for you, really, currently our free school meals is average across primary schools at 10%. The range is from 0.5% in the more affluent areas of Monmouthshire, up to 29% in areas of deprivation within our schools. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. I think it's in many ways self-explanatory, but are there any comments or questions from members? No, so yeah, Mr. McLean.
Sorry. Just two very brief points, which hopefully will just be for information to the committee. The first point is that for this year, the Welsh Government, the English model around the equivalent of the PDG, which is the pupil premium, is based on an ever FSM model, so any child who's ever been FSM, which allows them to account for children who move in and out of the poverty position or the area of deprivation. Welsh Government looked at that. They decided that that was not an affordable model, which I think is fair enough. It would have been a very, very costly model to move to. But they have looked at awarding PDG funding to pupils who have been eligible for FSM in the last 2 years. So the way they've done that is to use the PLASC data from 2017. What we're hearing very loudly from our schools is that that is actually disadvantaging them. So one of the schools with one of our highest levels of FSM entitlement, their PLASC data of 2017 was for 40 children of FSM. At 2018 it was 100. So they won't get recognised for that 100, they get recognised for the 40. So that was one point just around how FSM's working. The second point is, Nikki absolutely correctly referred to the impact of universal credit on the increase. We've literally, whilst we've been in the committee this morning, received a letter from Welsh Government about the future. The inclusion of universal credit as a determining factor for free school meal eligibility was an interim measure. They are saying in the letter that it would increase the number of children hugely significantly if it were to remain a part of the eligibility criteria. Therefore, they are now seeking to consider options for the new eligibility criteria for FSM in the future. And they reference an earned income threshold for recipients of universal credit in there. So this is a constantly moving policy position vis-a-vis national government positions with universal credit and FSM. So just to make members aware of that.
Well, thank you. And there we are, hot from the press, as they say. So that very interesting update that will obviously have repercussions for all our schools. And I'm sure, speaking on behalf of the committee, Mr McLean, I wonder if it would be possible for you to pass on our concerns about the issue about PLASC, where with the best intentions in the world, it has ended up disadvantaging some schools. And if you could pass on our disquiet about that, I think that would be appreciated by the committee. Okay, so if we could just note that verbal report then and move on. Item 9 is actions arising from previous meeting, and I'd like to pass over to Ms Eilert for this.
Thank you, Chair. This is really for you to note and for me to actually follow up on the actions. The first one relating to the draft autism bill, we did that. We sent a response out to the members that attended that meeting, and then Councillor Penny Jones took that forward with Shelley Welton. The next one is the verbal update regarding the free school meals and the transfer to Torfaen. We've done that today, so that's done. The 30-hour free childcare offer, I think Will might be able to clarify, but we're probably still waiting for the finalisation by Welsh Government there, so that will need to be an update to you when we have more information about how it can be implemented. The other items on there relate to the Adult Select Committee and their forward work programme. Chair, I think we've omitted the Scrutiny Forward Work Programme off the agenda today by accident, so I just want to raise a couple of things in the work programme for you to be aware of. In the work programme and the Council Diary, your next regular meeting is the 28th of June. You've got the Education Achievement Service performance report on that. You've got a draft NEET reduction strategy, that's young people not engaged in education, employment or training. We've also got an update from Debbie Morgan and Will McLean on the review of inclusion following the consultation, and we've got a budget monitoring report. In addition to this, Chair, we've been requested to scrutinise the Chief Officer's annual report, a safeguarding report and a report on disabled facility grants. Now, all three of those items relate to your committee, but also to the Adult Select Committee. So the proposal is to hold a special meeting on the afternoon of the, just bear with me, of the 18th of June, which is a Monday at 2 o'clock. So this would be your next meeting, essentially, Chair, before the regular meeting that is to be held on the 28th. So, okay, can we please diarise that? Monday, the 18th of June. It's an afternoon meeting. There will be a pre-meeting, as usual, at 1:30, and that will be a joint meeting of both select committees.
Okay, and could I thank you for keeping up to date with the actions from the committee as well? That's appreciated. I wonder if I could stay with you, as it were, and the remaining items here, the work programme, Cabinet, Council Forward Planner, where are we with those?
The Cabinet Forward Planner, as you know, is placed on every agenda for you to have sight of forthcoming decisions. It does look slightly different. I think they've changed the format of that, and we're trying to encourage it to be populated in greater sort of detail, much more in advance. So unless members would wish to identify in there anything that they feel is of interest to this committee that has not been brought forward in our work programme, then the proposal, Chair, is to note that.
Okay, we note that, and if any members do have issues, liaise with Ms Eilert. Thank you very much. Members, we've had some interesting discussions this morning around some really quite issues that should cause us concern. I think we have shown considerable humanity, if I could say, from the Chair, particularly around the issues around free school meals and about issues around taking forward the education of our more challenging young people who really do deserve the best in their education. Despite the challenges that they may bring to their teachers on occasions. So if I could thank you all very much for your attendance this morning, and now I will close the meeting. Thank you very much indeed.